Hello world, this is Daniel from Nerdsworth Academy, and today I'm going to be doing a review of Dungeons of Dredmor. So Dungeons of Dredmor is a turn-based roguelike dungeon crawling game developed by Gaslamp Games, and it was released in 2011. Currently you can get it on Steam along with its 3 expansions for about $10. So that's like, 1.5 sandwiches, so I figure that's a pretty good deal. So the key aspect of Dungeons of Dredmor is that it's a roguelike. What that means is that when you die, you get to start the game over. Now normally this is kind of a bummer. Like if you think of, if you're playing, I don't know, any game ever and you die, having to restart the entire game sounds pretty bad. However, in Dredmor, I think it works because one of the most important parts of the game is your skill selection. So when you first start a game, you choose 7 skills from a pool of about 50. And those 7 skills define who your character is. Are you going to be a mage? Are you going to be a warrior? Or are you going to be a rogue? Or are you going to be some combination? Are you going to be a vampire, pirate, swordsman, archaeologist, geologist? All of these things are possible. And you can do all different kinds of combinations with the skills. It really adds a huge amount of replayability to the game, because a warrior type character plays quite a bit differently than a range type character, being either some kind of rogue using archery or any kind of mage. So after you choose your skills, you're out in the dungeon. So what do you actually do in the game? Well, it's a turn-based dungeon crawler, so you do the things that you would expect in a turn-based dungeon crawler. So you find items, you kill monsters, you pick traps, you steal from vending machines, that kind of thing. Really, that's the core of the game. Particularly, most of the sort of player versus game element is going to be you against other monsters, or you against monsters and you against traps. Those are the 2 main things that are going to kill you in this game. And as you play, it becomes pretty clear that your build will be good against certain enemies and not as good against others, just depending on what skills you chose and how you chose to level up those skills. So the skill system really gives you a lot of replayability, and it really gives you the opportunity to learn about the game. And I think that if it weren't a roguelike, I think that probably wouldn't be the case. There is an option when you're creating a new character to make it so that you can reload that character if you die, but I don't know that I've ever played with that. I suppose it could be useful if you're just learning the game, but I don't necessarily recommend it. I think that the death is definitely dying is part of the experience and part of the fun of the game. So another thing that's really important about Dungeons of Dredmor, and that sets it apart from not only other roguelikes, but also just games in general, is that it has a really good sense of humor. So Dungeons of Dredmor, whether you're reading item descriptions or your character attributes are burliness, sagacity, cattishness, savvy, stubbornness, and nimbleness, and so they're clearly not the regular strength, dexterity, constitution, charisma, intelligence stats that are traditionally found in RPG games. And so this, it's little things like that permeate really through the entire game. Again, whether it's monster descriptions, sometimes you'll find signs in the dungeon. The monsters will also yell at you occasionally when you aggro them, and they'll say, oh, killing me won't bring back your lover, that kind of thing. And sort of references to various plots and themes. Another thing I think that is pretty strong about the game is the art direction. Dungeons of Dredmor has a very cartoony style that I think suits it really well. It really does a good job of offsetting the pretty steep difficulty curve of the game. And I think that having it be sort of light and colorful makes it fun and interesting, and also makes it accessible. I think it's I've played a little bit of some other roguelikes, and just having those high art production values make it a little bit easier to understand usually what's going on, and just make it a little bit more accessible to people that wouldn't necessarily sit down and play an ASCII-based roguelike. The music is also pretty nice. I generally leave it on when I'm playing, and so it's not... I don't think it's particularly amazing, but I think it does the job well, and it'll sort of alert you when you come into a shop or when you open up a door and you find a monster zoo, which is a huge collection of monsters in a single room. And I think it does a pretty good job. I think really my my only concerns about the game, or areas that I think I would like to see improved for Dungeons of Dredmor 2, should that game ever come out, are mostly sort of user interface problems. For instance, I think the crafting interface is hard to use. It essentially just gives you a list of all of your recipes, and you can sort it a little bit, but it's not very intuitive, and I think it's not very clear to use. It's not very easy to use. Similarly, I think inventory management is kind of a mess. You have a backpack that can hold whatever number of items, but if you have the Conquest of the Wizardland expansion, you also get early access to the pocket dimension, which essentially allows you to just put as much stuff in there as you want. And so it seems strange that you'd want to break up the gameplay to jump into the pocket dimension, drop a bunch of crafting materials, or pick up a bunch of crafting materials, then make something, and then like jump back into like the real world. It's really kind of convoluted. I wish they would just say, hey, just pick up as much stuff as you want, or pick up as many crafting materials as you want. I understand that they want to keep inventory management as part of the game. I don't think that it's that critical, and given that you can access the pocket dimension at any point, it really doesn't add any difficulty and just adds some tedium to the game. Likewise, I think that just the explanation of the stats and the explanation of the skill abilities is something that should be an option that you can toggle off and on. There are a few websites out there, such as the Dredmor wiki, which will actually explain, oh, this skill scales off this stat at this rate, and having that information available to you if you want to play at the higher difficulties, or just if you want to do some kind of min-max build, that's really valuable. And not having that in the game, I can understand that you wouldn't necessarily want to show that to every player, because it might be overwhelming to a new player, but it could also be valuable, and so having it as an option to turn it off and on, I think, would be valuable. Finally, as far as other technical things go, I found the game runs pretty well, even on, I had an old Dell laptop, and the game ran pretty well on it, so it has pretty low technical requirements, which is good. The one issue with that I had is, I have had several times where the game would just crash in the middle of it, and then I would lose a save, or be pushed up a couple levels in the dungeon, which is a little bit annoying. But luckily, that's only happened to me a few times in the 150 hours I put into the game, and so I think that's pretty forgivable. Finally, one thing that's also really great about the game that really adds to the replayability is that they've included Steam Workshop integration, and so you can go to the Steam Workshop and find new skill sets, new monsters, new items to craft, that kind of stuff. And so there's really been a lot. There's quite a bit there too, and so there's really there are a lot of ways that you can expand the game and make it even more replayable. So overall, I think the game is pretty great. It has a good dungeon crawling experience. If you like killing monsters, that's sort of fun. It is turn-based, so it feels very, very different than something like Diablo 3 or anything that's sort of action-y. So it's a little bit more thinking. I think that it does a great job of just feeling, sort of fun and interesting and being welcoming and accessible, while at the same time maintaining a very high difficulty. And so I think there's definitely a high skill cap and a high difficulty in terms of choosing skills. And I think the skill choice is really the most important decision, I find, because it really defines how your character is going to evolve through the game. And I think that decision is probably about half the fun of the game. I really enjoy sitting there and thinking, oh, well, if I take Vampirism, I know that scales off of health regeneration, so that means I want to take Master of Arms, which gives me bonuses to health regeneration, and Shield Bearer, which also does, which means I'll be a vampire in like heavy armor, and I'll be stealing lots of health. It'll be really good. And so I think that those sort of going through those thought processes is a lot of fun and makes the game very interesting. And then because it's a roguelike, when you die, you can tweak your build a little bit, and you don't feel like you're not necessarily wasting time or anything. And so that makes it very fun. So overall, I think the game is pretty great, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone that has played roguelikes or is interested in them, or just likes tinkering around with things. Again, it has pretty low system requirements, so it can run on most machines, and there's a huge amount of replayability here. It's definitely got a lot of value, and I've definitely got a lot out of it. So anyway, until next time, this has been Daniel from Nerdsworth Academy.